thirdly is to figure out a way in disaster relief where the private sector can actually share the risk with the government and the multilateral institutions as well. A lot of progress is being made in this direction. If you look internationally, what we're seeing over the last 5 years, in terms of overseas development assistance, there is a commitment to double that on disaster and climate response to 60 billion for the country that you do. Even if you look at bilateral donors like FCDO, there's a commitment to increase the spending to 12 billion over this five-year period of 2026. And we see the same with the banks as well. The banks are also spending, committing to spend a lot more in sustainable finance. But we also need to look at new ways, in particular, to look at how these risks, new methodology on risk sharing are in place so that the private sector can actively participate in this. And a lot of this actually needs to be done in the case of Pakistan as well. So I would say there are two areas where what could be done in the case of Pakistan. One would be to increase create mechanisms to increase the participation of the private sector. And two is to explore other ways of sharing risk, in particular bringing in blended finance that makes it easier for other players to join hands with the government of Pakistan and the international financial institutions.
Right. Thank you very much. You laid out how international commitments are increasing, but there has been an erosion of trust. The pledges of 100 billion annual up till 2020 that have been made at various COPs have not come through. And now with the recent report of international experts group, it's estimated that about $1 trillion are required annually for emerging markets and developing economies. That would require MDBs to triple the current financing. And it's not only public finance, but as you rightly mentioned, private finance would have to be scaled up, and MDBs are well positioned to bridge the trust factor and de-risk private capital for utilization in developing countries. And so that's what the international overhaul is about, and we're looking forward to seeing more of that on how MDBs can reorient their roles towards de-risking private capital and also bringing in through institutions such as IFC, the private sector, into larger projects, climate-oriented projects, and we'd like to see more of that in Pakistan and closely with the government. Now I'd like to talk to Søren about, so we've talked about climate finance. Climate finance comes in the form of various climate funds that are available, and such as GCF, etc. And then there are the innovative financial instruments, the market-based instruments such as bonds. There's also carbon finance markets. So what is the role that carbon finance market can play in Pakistan to bring in that additional revenue and also help us achieve our mitigation, our emissions targets that we are committed to UNFCCC. So how do you see that?
Thank you, Nadia. Let me first of all say that we're working on a project in Pakistan called the SPARK project, which is focusing on Article 6 of the Constitution. Article 6 is the successor, if you will, of the CDM. So it's a mechanism that will provide cash flows from the carbon market into the Pakistan economy. Given Pakistan's situation, we're talking about the situation of Pakistan and the adaptation needs of Pakistan. I'm in fact rather impressed with the Ministry of Climate Change and the Planning Commission on how those ministries are still engaging in the mitigation side, which would be seen as a sideshow in this regard. But there is quite a lot of commitment on the Pakistan side to engage also in mitigation. That said, when the question is what role can the carbon finance and the cash flows from the carbon market play in Pakistan's achievement of its own emissions reduction objectives? It's a simple question, but it's actually not so easy answer is that the answer is not simple because it really depends on how Pakistan decides to work with the mechanism. Most countries, when they are looking at Article 6, we also see that in Pakistan, but not only in Pakistan, they come from a perspective where they feel that they may be missing the train. So the term they use in Pakistan as well. Pakistan somehow missed the train on CDM. That is not going to happen in Article 6. We see other countries in the same situation. I was working with the UNEP and establishing the CDM loan scheme for countries that have less than 10 projects registered on CDM. So there was a focus on bringing everybody on board. Those countries are now really trying to use the Article 6 as a catch-up. The thing is that the revenues from the carbon market go into the projects. It doesn't go to Pakistan, it goes to the project owners. Of course, the Pakistan government could be the owner of projects, but then the carbon financing, the cash flows from the carbon market, could go into co-finance that particular project. Pakistan would have to correspondingly adjust its carbon budget. So in a sense, Pakistan doesn't win anything apart from the finance to that particular project, but it has achieved no emissions reduction. Pakistan remains committed to reducing emissions, but with what funding? Unless Pakistan and other countries in the same situation decide to charge for the reduction of its emission budget, there is no financing for Pakistan's emissions reduction commitment from the carbon market. What we're seeing in the market generally now is that there seems to be a race to the bottom, again, from this idea that we are missing the train. So you will see countries setting percentages of proceeds. If there is a carbon price negotiated between buyer and seller of, say, $10, you would take a percentage of that, adding that to the carbon price. And those percentages are seen between 10 and 5, 3%, but there seems to be a race to the bottom here. Completely missing the idea that the budget itself has a limit. That could be charged for at a completely different level. The carbon budget itself, not for the project, because the project would have the proceeds that are calculated just like in the CDM days, that is needed in order to make that particular project profitable. But for Pakistan to raise finance from the carbon market, we need to charge an additional sum, and in my view, not 10%, 100% or more of that matter, to raise capital from the carbon market for Pakistan's own emissions reduction. And it doesn't happen in Pakistan yet. And it doesn't happen anywhere else yet, because there is this feeling of we might miss the train. My view on that would be the train is not leaving. But this remains a commitment on developed countries as well to reduce emissions over time. And at some point this is going to become hard. And when it becomes hard, it becomes a seller's market. Right now we have a buyer's market, but we have to wait until we get a seller's market where you can actually charge what your project is worth.
Thank you very much for the insightful comments. You're right in the precaution into how there is a race to the bottom, and we are opening up our markets and assets to international corporations, and we have to do it in a strategic manner and charge for the corresponding adjustments, because we are reducing our carbon budget. So if, as you explained, that the way the transactions are structured, the revenue that comes in, it goes to the developer, the host, and the emissions go towards the buyer, and Pakistan does not benefit in terms of revenue or emissions reductions from this transaction. As per my understanding, it does still benefit from creating those climate investments and projects that still provide relief or the right opportunity, the right environment for the local community. So in that way, we do benefit, but it has to be structured in a manner that remains sustainable so that we keep working on our emissions budgets. So, Secretary Sal, now I'm going to talk to you about, we talked about private capital, climate finance, we talked about carbon finance. So, how are we at the Planning Commission and the government of Pakistan looking at blending finance opportunities and working with the private sector in terms of
Yes, thank you very much. I think all of us know that the fiscal space available to the government is very limited, and there are a number of constraints which the government faces as far as the public investment and the public sector development program is concerned. So in that context, I think blended finance is very important. Blended finance, there's no doubt that we need much more funds than what are available to the government. So we need to bring in the concessional finance, we need to bring in the private investments, and we need to lower the cost of borrowing by the government as well. So the Planning Commission, as far as the Planning Commission is concerned, we have a number of partners and entities which are working with the Planning Commission to bring in blended finance and to bring in the private sector investments. One is the NDRMF, which is obviously tasked with the whose main purpose is to bring in additional funding for the disaster risk reduction and for climate. And the other is the P3A authority, the Public and Private Partnership Authority, which also works with the Planning Commission and which tries to attract all the private sector capital and to channel it into climate related projects. So these two agencies, I think the goal of these two agencies and these two entities which are part of the planning division is very critical in bringing in additional capital and bringing in projects to put in place a portfolio of projects which is always available. Whenever we have an opportunity for blended finance available and for concessional finance available, we need to have projects which are ready and which are bankable, which can be offered immediately to the opportunity which is being presented. At the same time, I think it is critical that we need to have a regulatory framework in place, an institutional mechanism in place, which actually is welcoming of all the blended finance, which is welcoming of all the private sector investments in the climate area. So these are some of the areas I think where the role of planning commission and the planning ministry is critical. One more area I think where we need to focus on is that relates to the earlier question as well, is relating to the coordination between the various ministries. One thing which I have observed over the past few years is that we seem to be working in silos and we don't seem to have any clarity on who is going to do what. I believe that it should be a whole of the government approach to bring in climate finance, to bring in blended finance. Obviously, the Ministry of Climate Change has to be in the lead as far as the technical aspects is concerned, but at the same time, the role of Planning Commission, the role of the Ministry of Finance, and the role of the Economic Affairs Division. So these four, I believe, are the critical ministries in the government which have to work together to actually take this agenda of climate resilient projects forward. And these need to coordinate much more frequently than what is happening at the moment. I think one good step which has been taken, which I alluded to in my previous question also, is the Sustainable Finance Bureau. which is, I think, putting in place a very good mechanism whereby all these four ministries will be coming together. And I believe we have, there's a concept of an executive board or a body like that, which will be headed by the Deputy Chairman of the Commission. So these four ministries will be reporting to him. So very close coordination between the relevant ministries and the role of NDRMF and the role of the Public-Private Partnership Authority. All these have to work together to actually bring in private sector investments and to attract further concessional financing. As I said, our fiscal space is limited, and I don't see that even in years going forward, our public sector will be able to invest that much. So I think the focus on the private finance going forward is very important.
Thank you very much, Secretary Sir. Another thing that we are doing as a Planning Commission is that we work with development partners such as the World Bank and Asian Development Bank. Since they're already accredited with GCF, we've asked them to start blending their projects with GCF. And with the recent Sin Resilience project, we were able to, for mangroves, we were able to bring in 14 million from GCF, so that reduced our cost of financing, and that's something that we will really should have to reduce the cost of financing and burden on public exchequer. So this brings me to Abhas. Abhas, we are working with the World Bank on national climate finance strategy. What do you think should be the priorities for key stakeholders in establishing a structural framework for climate finance?
So, Nadia, first of all, I'd like to apologize that I have to step out in like 5 minutes for the next session. But I think the question you asked is a very important one. And let me take a stab at sort of different aspects which I see will be the pillars of a national climate finance facility. So first of all, whenever I hear these numbers about, X 100 billion, that much trillion, my mind kind of brain stops functioning. Because these numbers are truly meaningless. I mean, the message is that whatever assistance comes from the international community, it's not going to be even a rounding error. It's not going to be even a drop in the ocean for what the needs are for a country like Pakistan. So overwhelmingly, the adaptation needs, especially, will need to be funded by domestic resources, whether by the government or by the private sector. And we need to recognize that. So that's step number one. Now, if you turn to the public investment side of things, where I think we need to work on is to establish a framework for public investments whereby you are building the adaptation costs into your investments upfront. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So when you build a school, and if you locate it in a safe area, if you make sure that it's safe from not just climate change but say earthquakes, for example, you are actually going to save the avoided losses when if a disaster happens. Now, right now, your public investment will treat that as an expenditure, and I would argue that it's actually an investment. And it will, if you do a life cycle costing, it will end up saving you money in the long term. So these are the kind of things we need to start building into our public investment framework. And we are happy to work with Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Finance to help to develop that. Other countries have done that already. So that's number one. Now, second, when we talk about blended finance, what we have to realize is that the cost of capital is paramount. So the International Energy Agency did a study a couple of years ago, and they said that if you take, say, a solar project and you locate that in Europe, the cost of capital is about 3%. You take exactly that project and you put it in Africa, the cost of capital is 19 to 20%. Now, I cannot agree or that the difference in risk between Africa and say Europe is 17-18%. So the private sector is mispricing the risk. And this is true for Pakistan, this is true for most developing countries. So what agencies like the World Bank can help is to systematically unpack these risks and then start mitigating them in a robust manner. So for example, partial risk guarantees, so that you can crowd in more capital. start thinking about even equity. You know, whenever we think about investments in projects like solar or wind or whatever, like, we default to debt. But why can't we think creatively about also equity? Why can't government also take equity positions in some of these? So we need to start thinking creatively about how do we crowd in the private sector. And then the final point I would mention is standardization, which is that one way to lower the risk of capital is to standardize many of the documents, the procurement, the environmental, the social safeguards, in a way so that the private sector is comfortable. They know that for the next 20 years, this is the regulatory environment I'm facing. Then they will put their capital in place. Those would be my suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. You're right, we have to bring more people to the table, the private sector, the investment rating agencies, the bank regulators. Otherwise we'll be talking within ourselves and not really resolving the problems where it emanates from. The cost of capital is one such example. Thank you very much for your participation, and yes, we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So now my next question is to Robert. Robert, we've talked about climate finance and how we have to bring it and how Pakistan is not being able to mobilize. Are there examples of governance structures in other countries which you've seen as that we would learn from on to coordinate mobilization and absorbing the finance to the projects? And Secretary Sahab already talked about the direction that Pakistan is going and how we will go to it, how we could learn from other countries.
Thank you, Nadia. So, let me give you a couple of examples of other countries where such governmental coordination at the central level, provincial level, as well as local levels. But before I do that, I just want to refer to the climate action tracker, which provides 4 sets of criteria for what would qualify as good governmental coordination. The first, number 1, is political will, or what the political leadership wants to do in terms of climate action. Number 2 is institutional arrangements to actually, some of the things that Secretary Sahab talked about, how do you make sure there's coordination at the center, at the provincial level, and the local level. Number 3 would be the policy processes that clearly outline how you're going to actually progress towards net zero. That would be the whole stack of documents from, in Pakistan's case, the 4RF, the NAP, and the NDC. And lastly, number 4 is how do you engage with stakeholders. So if you take that as the climate action practice framework, I refer to 2 countries. One is Colombia, where they made a conscious effort to make sure the action is not a burden just for the central government. It brings in regional governments as well as other stakeholders. So they have what they call an intersectoral commission for climate change, which at the top level is coordinated by the ministry responsible for environment. It brings across all relevant ministries and agencies at the national level. Then what they've done is they've created what they call regional nodes. Now these nodes sit between the central government and the regional governments, and they will have the representation of government as well as regulatory agencies, but also private sector as well as academia and agencies that can bring some credibility to them, scientific credibility as well. And the nodes, they don't have a legal status of their own. They are a collection of different organizations, but the representation is from government and other entities, and they represent them in that capability. This was set up in 2016. What has happened since then is much greater ownership in terms of actions, much more accountability at the local levels, in particular through the kind of more transparency that the nodes have created. There's a lot more accountability as well, and that seems to be working from a point of view of even helping to raise climate finance as well. The next one I refer to is South Africa, where again they've got 3 levels. One is at the interministerial committees on climate change, which are represented by the ministers. Then you have the intergovernmental Committee on Climate Change, which are represented by the provincial governments. And then you also have at the national level a body for all the direct platforms. Again, we've seen a lot of action here. And one other area where South Africa has done a really good job is in particular to actually make sure the knowledge base that is used to demonstrate on taxonomy, etc., are clearly kind of audited independently, and they bring the private sector as key stakeholders in defining what the climate finance needs are. So initiatives with the kind of with investors, the private sector, etc. And this is really working in kind of sharing that sense of ownership. So these are two examples I'd refer to. I'd say every country chart its own course based on the structures that you've outlined. But it's really important to think of how do you make sure you can remove the friction between different ministries that may have overlapping functions, and also making sure that the federal government, provincial governments and local governments all see that we're working on the same objective.
Thank you very much, Robert. So now I'll move on to Søren. You talked about how Pakistan has to be cautious about going into carbon markets, and in terms of, and we have to take a stepwise approach so that there is no race to the bottom. Carbon markets, from what we understand, is that when you talk about carbon finance and you bring in the private sector, you introduce a profit motive. And that generates a lot of interest in the private sector and also the government to mobilize the frameworks and regulatory environment to make carbon markets functional. So that profit motive could be used as an advantage to mobilize the right regulatory environment, have the building blocks for monitoring, reporting and verification so that we move towards activities which we are already doing and translate them into credits of high integrity. So what kind of a stepwise approach do you think we should take? Should we start with the domestic market? Should we look at ECMs? Should we go towards international markets where Pakistan's put forward guidelines? And what are your thoughts on that, on the approach?
Thank you. Let me first of all just briefly comment on Mr. Abhas' input on how we need to think strategically or creatively on developing instruments that can leverage climate finance. 10 years ago, I wrote a book with the conclusion that the Green Climate Fund, then still under establishment, should in fact only be a guarantee instrument, because that is what is missing in the market. Unfortunately, nobody listens. But it's not too late. We can move the Green Climate Fund towards working more on guarantees. The second point I want to, just before answering your question, is I mentioned before that we are working on the SPARK program, which is focused on establishing an Article 6 framework in Pakistan. We are not the only ones doing that in Pakistan either. And the Ministry of Climate Change is doing a great job in distributing the different tasks of different agencies and owners to work on this architecture in Pakistan. What I think is missing is that we are all working, or we're all preaching from the same book, so to say, that we in fact are in agreement among ourselves and on the donor side of the vision. Where is Pakistan? And that comes then to your question. Right now, it seems that we are focused on just getting the Article 6 framework into place and making sure that the private sector can undertake its transactions. And we're not really considering how does that integrate with Pakistan's future domestic initiatives on emissions reduction. And that could very well take the form of the carbon market. And for that, we've been working on that in a different context for establishing national carbon markets as, not necessarily as a platform for participating in Article 6, but it could be a platform for that. And the advantage of that, do that gradually. You can select sectors in which you would want emissions reduction to happen. You could either auction or in the beginning grandfather a significant amount of the emissions allowances that companies would need, and then only trade in the rest. But my argument would be that move towards auctioning at an early stage, where companies are actually buying allowances for all their emissions. Because that would also signal that you are charging for the national emission budget. As I mentioned before, right now, it doesn't cost anything. The aim is to start putting a stamp, making sure that electricity costs are covered by the share proceeds, but nothing further than that. You're not charging for the reduction of the national budget. But if you have a national emission trading system, which is based on charging for emission allowances, it integrates very well with sending price signals also outside Pakistan. And this is the value of our carbon budget. So auction emission allowances domestically to selected industries that are high emitting as a starting point. And you can look at the market, if you will, as an illustration. You don't need to wait for 20 years to get the market to work as it does now, but actually somehow starts to constrain emitters. It can happen faster. But move towards that auctioning of allowances, that will raise domestic finance for emissions reduction or adaptation activities from the private sector.
So what you're proposing is that we start with domestic carbon market and bring in high intensity, high emitting sectors so that we develop a mechanism and a price discovery mechanism which will then be able to allocate value to carbon budget of Pakistan, and that would send signals internationally. You had earlier talked about how in Europe the cost of reduction of one credit or 1 million ton of carbon is about $100, and why should that not be a reference for Pakistan? Could elaborate on that?
Sure. Normal pricing strategies would consider two things. You have a cost side, when you need to have your cost recovered, but you also benchmark against the payment capacity of your client or your payment willingness. Right now, we seem to be focused on the cost. We are generating, we have systems to calculate what is the cost of carbon, which is getting based on benchmark or IRR. And that is then the price of carbon. It's a production cost-based approach. It doesn't really consider what the client's alternative cost would be. And here the client's alternative cost would be $100. So why don't we charge 90 or 70? And instead of 20? The answer is right now is, but then the clients will go, they don't want to pay that much. We said, fine, as I mentioned before, they'll come later. We don't need to sell our budget right now. We have it for the future as well. And in the future, it will be becoming much more difficult for the buyer's side. When now they're paying already 100. It's going to go up. And the projections is 300. So this is, the challenge is not going away. Your budget is not going away either, unless you sell it prematurely. That's what do you call it? You're selling the family silver, don't sell it too cheaply.
Thank you very much. So with this, yes, I will take some questions from our participants. It's
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. A very interesting discussion. I think Abhas made a very interesting point. He wrapped it up in creativity as well. Why don't we think creatively, and then he left the room. And I think for the sake of discussion, I'll still ask my question. But my prominent question is to Søren. So I mean, for the equity and the government actually becoming an equity partner in climate investment, all kinds of projects, I think yes, that option has always been there, and I don't personally think that there is a great degree of creativity which is required for that. My understanding from the public finance systems or the requirements is that if the government actually do become equity partner in so many different projects, it of course contributes to the risk rating of the government itself. In a country like Pakistan, it becomes quite a challenge, which of course is a challenge. And that's the reason behind it, referring to the BCG study, that in the different instruments which have been, for de-risk instruments which have been proposed, the equity component is there, but it's very lower at the recommendation list, and that's one of the reasons, because it is not going to be extremely suitable and feasible in the public financing system of the government of Pakistan for a very long period of time. And I think many countries are actually pulling themselves out of it because there is no credible kind of a system working. Abbas is not there to respond to this question, but I think if anyone wants, I think we can better engage ourselves into a kind of an interesting discussion here. Søren, you made some very interesting, and I would say that some of the slightly kind of a controversial points as well. I really want to challenge you on some of, having you and me both who work in the CDM, we burned our youth years in those corridors. Two things. One thing is using the same analogy of whether the train is missing or not. Well, I personally believe that with Paris Agreement, have a clear deadline of 2030, corresponding adjustment, very nicely built into the mechanism, and I would say that that was a creative mechanism and creative instrument in the Paris Agreement. And so, there is a clear finishing line at 2030. I'm sure that it is, of course, the new instruments are going to be coming into existence, and they should. Otherwise, the doomsday which we've been talking about is not really too far away. But in case of Pakistan, yes, maybe we're not going to miss the train, but I personally believe that we are maybe on a wrong even platform. The trains are passing from some other platform that we're not really in the right platform to catch the train. Why I'm saying this? Because there is a carbon budget, yeah? And that carbon budget, of course, if we don't utilize the carbon budget, and leave it up to this point, not having our policy infrastructure in place, not really incentivizing our private sector to engage and put into the investments into the efficiencies, the process efficiencies, the energy efficiencies in the forestry sector, in the mangrove. I mean, there are so many different sectors. If we don't incentivize this, I think rushingly we're going to cruise through to 2030, and we're going to remain our carbon budget nicely, neatly intact, like we did for the city. I'm quite surprised. Very similar discussions were taking place in 2002-2003 that don't sell your carbon credits. This is our carbon asset. There was quite a misunderstanding at that time. And I'm a little bit surprised that a misunderstanding is so sustaining itself so much even at this point in time. So 2030 is going to be coming in, and then yes, we might be powerful enough, and in the future instruments we actually sit down and renegotiate that. Okay, we didn't burn our carbon budget, so we are one of those good guys out in the public global community. So what is the reward for us? If I'll be sitting maybe on the side of the table in the negotiation rooms, I'll be saying that yes, we have the opportunity. The whole world was moving in one direction. Why are we not moving in that direction? And you could have actually, you could have cleaned up your industry. You could have cleaned up your public transport system. You could have sorted out your energy distribution systems, and I can go on and on. I think to benefit from Article 6. And there's another question which I have, benefit from Article 6. I think this is the right time. We are already late actually. And there is a lot of potential in the market. I know it for sure. And a few years back, we did the study for margin abatement costs for different sectors. And I was quite actually pleasantly surprised that Pakistan is a carbon investment haven, but we're not being able to take the benefit out of it. I'm still taking a lot of time, but I'm a little bit excited about it. So, I mean, that's one of the reasons. So, I personally think that instead of really making it complex, we should incentivize it. And secondly, Article 6 and VCM, infrastructure, policy infrastructure should be designed in such a smart manner that it is actually complementing the VCM, although Article 6 is complementing the VCM. And at some point in time, and this is going to happen, sorry, you know which I know, this is something is going to happen, that the both mechanisms are going to be mutually recognizing each other. China is going to push for it because they have such a massive, huge VCM market. They're not going to leave the winning share until they get kind of a recognition in the next box. I know that for sure. You know that. I think we need to incentivize it rather than putting the levy, rather than keeping our budget very mightily safeguarded. Because otherwise, it's just not going to benefit everyone. I mean, our textile industry is being crowded out, just because of that. Because the carbon emission for every ton which goes for our export is much higher. And CBAM is coming into effect as well. So very soon from the European textile market, we haven't taken the benefit from the carbon market and we have reduced our emissions. Similarly, cement sector, similarly, power sector, the iron and steel sector. And I can go on and on and on actually. So I think there is a need to incentivize rather than putting the roadblocks into it. And at least this is our understanding. Nadia, do you agree?
Søren, answer the question.
That was many questions.
I know that. You made many points.
But I think the general point that connects it all is that Pakistan might have a budget that it's not going to use by itself. Then why not sell it then? And that raises the main question on the whole Article 6 infrastructure, which is environmental integrity. You should not sell a budget that you don't need anyway. Because if you don't need it anyway, it's already inflated. And that is what the carbon market should not allow. I mean, if we just, that's the hot air from the CBM days, which nobody really wanted to buy. Even if we made green investment schemes in Russia where you had to use proceeds to something good, something green, but nobody wanted to buy it anyway. But, so if the idea is, well, let's just get these transactions going because we don't need the budget anyway, I think we are not doing ourselves a favor in terms of arguing why should we do carbon markets at all. So I think that is the main point here. But then rather miss train because you would not make a good name for yourself if you're selling money. And I think that maybe captures actually the whole thing.
And then also in terms of private sector finance requires a lot of money to get to. So very much rethink how
yeah, about a whole area came from Russia.
so the interesting anyway,
We'll have offline.
Yeah, I would say that.
we'll take the private finance as a
Okay. So,
Yeah.
yes, sir. And
May I?
talking stuff?
Ji, ji.
Yes.
first level as he's addressing what
Thank
he's
you.
trying to address.
I just wanted to first of all come back our planning documents were designed about 50 years ago and this kind of reform is very good essential document. And I also appreciate the decisions that we have made to have backward and forward linkages are also approved, and that is not in the case which is very assuring, particularly since you mentioned that planning the finance and climate will put their head together and accelerate the matter. So we have all the support from the gang of four. Please. And I want to make a brief comment, open in mind with your permission, sir. About the cost of climate change Pakistan operations by the World Bank was about 5% of GDP. That's about $20 billion. And and there is no international finance that has played a very role in any country, let alone Pakistan. And there are two stumbling blocks. Even though there was money available, first stumbling block would be whether or not we have the absorption potential. And second, have we, as we just mentioned, accelerated our reform process to that level where the money could not only be absorbed, but also respond to some of the climate challenges and adaptation. So, there are two fundamental issues that we have. One is accelerating reform, and second is enhancement of the cost. Now, the money that we spend has three challenges. One is that we don't spend enough. And the second challenge is that there's a lot of maladaptation, wrong choice. And then there is a lot of money that we should have spent, but we are not spending as the cost of inaction. In these three domains, the cost of inaction, the cost of action, and the cost of desired action, the amounts will be much larger than today. What Abhas said before going, the different variations of financing that need to be addressed. So I wanted to ask a very simple question is that how could we, in your view, entice the private sector investments with the consensus in this panel that what is that in the private sector doesn't have money. Private sector did not go for ISO 14,000 20 years ago. That could have given them saving on water or energy. And then they did not go for CDM 10 years ago or 15 years ago. That would have sensitized them about carbon emissions. So we don't want to use the analogy of machine train or not machine train. But one, their size is not skilled. Second, they are not have not been prepped or prepared for this. And all of a sudden we say that you start investing in bonds. And particularly in an economy where almost more than half of our economy is in the informal sector. That means the private sector for us means a large part small businesses. So I want to ask you, how should we build on this? Connected with the business related
Sheikh Saab, thank you for that question. I think you also answered quite a few of the issues that you raised. Again, going back to the study we did, as you say, like it is, and as Abhas Saab said as well, it's not feasible for the government to be solely financing this. We need to bring in a wider set of stakeholders as well, and in particular the private sector, both domestic and international. And at the launch of our report, one of the points the Honourable Minister for Climate Change made was that Pakistan has some of the biggest glaciers in the world. So the cost of inaction on protecting biodiversity and environment is also massive, not just for Pakistan, but for the whole world. So our opinion, as you've seen in the report, is that international best practice is kind of a clear quantification of cost of inaction, so that this doesn't just show what the government can do, but it also brings in other stakeholders in the private sector, international financial institutions, who can then look at and say, what would that cost be? So the recent work that we did in the Philippines, so if we compared 2030 to 2040, the cost of inaction for the Philippines rose from 7% of the GDP to 13%. Whereas if you just invest in quality adaptation of resilience crops, the actual cost involved is about 15 to 20% of that as well. And once you do the cost of inaction, you create a clear pipeline of priority actions and priority projects. Then you create a clear map for the private sector, for international financial institutions, for use of blended finance instruments, etc., that you can actually work with as well. And lastly, I'm not offering a solution, but a comment is, like Mark Carney's point about the tragedy of horizons as well. I mean, we do need to get the private sector to think long term. It's putting climate risk as part of the plan, and that requires a lot of ongoing engagement. But it also requires us to actually come up with a clear taxonomy on what qualifies as ESG investment. We also have to create the financial guidelines so that companies have an incentive to actually report what they spend. Investors have an incentive to report as well. And we also create the guidelines for the banking sector to not just lend to the biggest companies, but to some of the smaller companies in the SME space, etc. Because they are, as you say, in a country like Pakistan, they are really, really big stakeholders. So there's a lot we need to do collectively. And again, I see a lot of enthusiasm and leadership around here as well. So I'm sure Pakistan will take the right step forward in this.
Thank you, Robert. So the study that you did for Philippines, the cost of inaction, were you able to disaggregate it by areas and subsectors and projects? So it was able to produce the right
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Actually, I want to come back and dig a bit deeper from you. I'm not clear what is cost inaction. How do you define that? In my own previous experience, I'm thinking that the cost of maladaptation is much higher because it drops the feature of people into the infrastructure society or something. Therefore, at least how much. So the question is the cost of maladaptation included in the cost of action, although it's not a plan, it's not action, or in your definition, it's not.
So, look, when we calculate the cost of an action, you look at the economic, social, and environmental cost. So when you take the economic sector, you could look at what is the impact on the food and water systems, for example. You could look at the cost on the economy. If you take a different example, if you look at the impact of COVID, what is the impact on the industry? This still needs to be quantified. We do need really advanced modeling and data systems to actually do this, which we have actually done in places as Philippines. And if you take the social cost, what is the cost of the floods in terms of the impact on people's lives, and not just the cost for the government to provide rehabilitation, but also the cost that it has on families. So yes, you can really work through the different systems and estimate what that cost of inaction will be. It has to be backed by clear scientific data. And as you say, maladaptation could have massive, impact. A really sorry tale would be if you look at the state of Bihar in India, where a lot of waterways, what canals were built to actually reduce flooding. As a consequence of that, 25% of Bihar's arable land is now underwater. So if you just look at the agricultural and food cost of maladaptation, that's also massive.
That's a classic case. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
So hello, my name is Shakya. So I have my question from Mr. Rehman and Mr. Awais, but I'm going to address two things that Mr. Søren said. You said that basically Pakistan needs to move towards auctioning at an early stage so that we can signal that we are moving towards a national emissions project. And then the second thing you said is that since we have leftover carbon budgets, why don't we look towards selling that on an international stage? Let's suppose that by the year 2030, the Pakistan government has launched a national emissions project that has carbon reductions and sequestration projects within Pakistan, the credits for which are sold at an international stage. To achieve that vision, what are 5 challenges that you believe your organization will face, and how can that be overcome? In terms of human capital itself, resources, standards, etc.
there's a political commitment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think five challenges, I'm not sure about that, but one big challenge which we are facing two actually. One we have talked about in much detail, and that is coordination between all the government agencies. Mr. Abhas has called it Big Four. So those four ministries, I think, are critical if we need to take us a climate agenda forward. And my experience over the years has been that we have been trying to do too many things, but everybody is working like in a silo and trying to. There's no single point which actually is the lead here. Ministry of Climate Change, they should be the technical ministry. Raising financing is the job of the Ministry of Finance. In my view, the Ministry of Planning is responsible for project preparation, project appraisal, everything related to the development side. Indian Economic Affairs Division, they are the lead ministry who deals with all the MDBs and all the private leasing and coming. So these four have to work together if we have to take our climate agenda forward into. We have a pipeline of projects which are available on teams. The other issue which we have been facing is that of HR, you mentioned, the capacity issues. There is, again, there's a serious issue which is facing Pakistan at the moment. We need to actually develop a pool of people who are experts in different areas related to climate and climate finance, and we need to have proper trainings of those people who are working for the country. I understand that we are seeking help from the UNEP Copenhagen. We have a meeting with them a couple of weeks there. I think there will be some trainings imparted in the first quarter of the next year. So these two areas, I think, when I look at it from the ground level, one is coordination between all the relevant ministries. We don't need to work in silos. And the other is the developing the proper capacities and the HR which should be made available to these ministries. I think if we can address these two issues, I think we will be much more comfortable in moving forward as far as the climate agenda is concerned.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So, my personal experience being here and like part of a negotiating room as well, I fully 110% agree with what you're saying. And I think that's not just a climate change problem in Pakistan, that's a general bureaucratic problem that we face a lot of those times. My first question is, in terms of the silos, how do you actually consolidate all of that? Because we have two problems. A lack of institutional memory. You could be leader secretary tomorrow. So, you don't know, possibly. So how does that longevity go in that institution if that person is not there anymore? And secondly, what is that common platform that everyone is having those conversations on? Because right now, even here, we have a foreign office, we have finance people, we have climate change people, but I don't feel that the table is completely in sync as it could have been. And one thing that I'm really pleasantly surprised about is the Saudi delegation. Every single negotiation, how on point they've been, and women have been on point. So clearly, whatever training they've been going through the last 2 years would be BCT gain because I don't know who's doing it. But whatever they're doing is really working. So I just want to understand for COP 29, COP 30, 31, how do we change that going forward?
Once again, common platform. I think I mentioned one platform, which is the Sustainable Finance Bureau, which has been established. And is that bureau will bring together all these four ministries under the chairmanship of the Deputy Cabinet Planning Commission. So I think one issue with the federal government is if you compare it to the structure of the provincial government, there's a marked difference. In the provinces, there's a chief secretary, so all the secretaries report to him. And that is one common place where everybody comes together and everybody can coordinate different policies. That type of structure is missing in the federal government, so there's no corresponding figure, somebody corresponding to the chief secretary in the federal government. As you rightly said, there are frequent transfers, so that is a problem. But as far as the common platform is concerned, we can start with this Sustainable Finance Bureau, bring it everybody under the oversight of the Technical and Planning Commission. The other forums which are provided for in our constitution, in the law, like the NEC and the ECMAC, they are also appropriate forums. Those should be much more effective and those should be meeting much more frequently than what they are doing at the moment. And I think all the economic, since these forums deal with the economic policies and climate change is close to how the economy works. So all the policies should be actually discussed at the NEC level, which would be ideally meeting every quarter. It meets only once a year so far. So we have common platforms available, and at a lower level we have the Sustainable Finance Forum, which we are inshallah going to operationalize very soon. The other issue is about frequent transfer. So what I'm saying is that the capacities of the ministries should be developed at the technical level, at the working level. The secretaries, obviously, one doesn't know. I can be in secretary when I go back, so I can't say anything about it. But I'm an administrative secretary, I'm not a specialist in that, and I have to actually make sure that the capacities, the right capacities are developed in the industry which I'm working with. So the capacities have to be at the technical and working level, and those are the people who have to take on the agenda forward and who have to actually work in the industry.
Thank you very much. That was the last question. Now I am going to thank my esteemed panelists for bringing in the examples from other countries and how and highlighting how cross-regional support coordination for climate change is essential. Climate change is not a side project. It requires strong leadership and coordination so all boats can row in the same direction. I would also like to thank the audience for the engaging questions and your time.